Hi, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jay, and I'm a determinedly online historian who not only likes to talk about history, which I do on Saturday afternoons, but I also like to analyze the news, and I do that on Sunday afternoons. So today, let's just get into it with our first real big story, and one that is going to be requiring some follow-up over the next couple of weeks, and that is the Trump-Putin talks that are scheduled in Alaska for this next weekend. So at first look, this appears it's like potentially going to be a repeat of the Munich agreements, which happened in 1938 between Neville Chamberlain and Adolf Hitler, which ceded Czechoslovakia to Nazi Germany. Putin has that same goal, but he has, unlike Hitler, been at war for 3 years with Ukraine, and he wants to keep his territorial gains and gain a pause in this war so he can rebuild the Russian military. And also, Donald Trump himself needs a distraction from the Epstein scandal and the bad economic news that has occurred lately, so he's hoping to get a win out of this. Now, unfortunately, just like in 1938, no one from Ukraine, especially Zelensky, will be in attendance with Trump and Putin during this summit. And Zelensky, unlike the Czechs back in 1938, has stated that any deal made without Ukrainian input will not be honored by the Ukrainians and is essentially dead on arrival. And within the past couple of days, he's received support from major EU countries on this. Now that I say that, I will mention that Zelensky is reading Putin absolutely correctly in this matter. I did a lot of my undergraduate work in history on Russian history, and the one thing I do know is I have read up on Putin, and he is a highly intelligent KGB trained thug who will do anything to restore the old Soviet Union. I do have a few recommendations. Probably the best biography so far that I read on Putin is The Man Without a Face by Masha Gessen. It is available in paperback and audiobook through bookshop.org. Now, if graphic novels are your thing, I do recommend Putin's Russia, The Rise of a Dictator by Daryl Cunningham, and Accidental Czar by Andrew S. Weiss. Now, Mr. Weiss was an intelligence officer for the United States, serving with NSA, the Pentagon, and the State Department, so that one should be considered a must-read. So what do I think about all this? Donald Trump is entirely over his head in this matter. He never learned anything from Chamberlain's mistake at Munich, which is deterrence only works if the state being conceded to has been fully satisfied. Like Hitler, and like I said earlier, Putin has a much larger goal, namely rebuilding the old Soviet empire and its sphere of influence. Like I said earlier, Putin was trained by the KGB. He was training on handling assets, as well as his experience doing that in old East Germany, and is part of what led him to become a Russian autocrat. He used all those skills to manipulate his way into power. And on the other hand, Trump's narcissism is going to cause him to cave. Like I said, not only does he want a distraction from the current Epstein scandal as well as the backlash to his economic policies, he is coveting, and I do mean coveting, a Nobel Peace Prize. The most recent president to receive the Peace Prize was Obama, and we know how Donald Trump feels about Obama. And the others were Teddy Roosevelt for his negotiations in the Russo-Japanese War back in 1906. Woodrow Wilson in 1919 for his efforts at Versailles. And of course, Jimmy Carter in 1994 for being just a good guy. Also, Trump, when it comes to this Nobel Prize, believes that tweeting about ending a Pakistani-Indian ceasefire and bombing Iran, which he later ended the war on, entitles him to that Peace Prize. On the other hand, Putin has a bigger problem. He needs to end the conflict as soon as possible. Ukrainian drone strikes have been just devastating the logistical network in Russia itself. Lately, when I wrote this script, this was at 2 refineries yesterday, but now a third oil refinery has been hit yesterday from the Russian drone strikes. And when I was compiling all this information yesterday afternoon, just with 2 oil refineries being taken out, there's been a 10% decrease in crude oil being refined into refined petroleum products, which is causing issues. As in, Putin is sitting on excess crude oil, which he needs to get rid of, which is why India took that deal this past week, because they're getting the oil cheap from Russia because Putin's just offloading it. Drones have also been targeting the Russian Air Force bases, and I'm not just meaning the ones within a few hundred kilometers of the Russo-Ukrainian border, but there was also that big sleeper attack on June 1st, which struck thousands of kilometers into Russia and took a major hit on Russia's strategic bombing force. And more importantly, just by using drones, whether it's on the surface or in the air, combined with modern EU anti-ship missiles, without having a navy, Ukraine has control of the Black Sea. The Russians abandoned the port of Sevastopol in the Crimea and pulled everything back to the other side of the Kerch Strait. They are not venturing into the Black Sea. In fact, they ceded control. Russia has ceded control of the Black Sea to Ukraine. And like I said, that's without Ukraine even having any naval assets other than surface drones. Also, another issue is Russia is running out of men and material quickly. The Russian army cannot recruit fast enough to replace their casualties. Part of that was during the first few weeks of the war back in 2022. A lot of folks who were fiscally able or had jobs outside of Russia, with companies outside Russia where they were working remotely, they fled Russia. They got the hell up out of Dodge, which is causing a shortage of intelligent manpower that could be filled out the lower ranks of the officer corps. Also, and this has been an issue going back for as long as there's been the Red Army and then the current Russian army, is there is a lack of a professional NCO corps. Unlike the United States and its Western allies, who rely on senior non-commissioned officers, your sergeants and petty officers and chief petty officers, those NCOs, they pretty much run the United States and Western militaries. The officers are really there just to make sure that the NCOs are getting the task accomplished and administrative work. And if also a few specialist roles that Congress by law said they had to do. The NCOs really run the show. However, the Russian army has always had an issue where they couldn't trust the NCOs, especially after the Red Army was established under Trotsky in 1917, and that was for ideological purposes. They only trusted their officers to run everything, so a lot of duties that have been conducted by NCOs, especially at the platoon and company level, were conducted by the officers and still are in the Russian military. And that's caused a problem because those junior to mid-level officers are being quickly promoted to more senior levels because there's been a loss of senior officers in the Russian army since the beginning of the war. Some of this has been from drone strikes, and some has been from being dismissed, and then others are more mysterious, or what the Russians say is that those officers fell out a window. Furthermore, Russia is running out of modern tanks and artillery. Famously, we all remember that during the beginning of the war, Russian tanks were just being abandoned because they ran out of supplies, and then the Ukrainians just took it. So within a couple of weeks of the war starting, Russia went from being the second largest tank corps or the largest tank corps to having a smaller tank corps than Ukraine, just because they just abandoned a lot of stuff. Also, the Russians are running out of their Soviet-era stockpile. Like I said last week, there's already been an ammunition shortage, and they're having to rely on North Korea and Iran, as well as China, to resupply their ammunition, but they're also out of everything. Ukrainian drone strikes are just been devastating the ground forces. And while Russia is still able to make strikes with their drone and air forces, in order to win the war, you have to have ground forces to just go in there and secure everything. So my final thoughts on this is, in this, of course, we do need to see what actually occurs this coming weekend. Is Trump's going to agree to whatever Putin wants? His fragile ego needs a win. And Putin will, with that deal, will try to sue Zelensky for peace. Ukraine will reject the deal. And also, I am expecting another major deep inside Russia attack from Ukraine, like the one we saw on June 1st, if not leading up to or during the summit, then within a few days after, just as a sign that Zelensky is not going to take the deal sitting down. Now, with that said, everyone just cares about the Epstein thing. Donald Trump wants to get rid of it, so we'll move on to that. So this morning I was on Drudge Report and I saw this headline, and apparently part of the reason why she hasn't gotten a pardon yet, but it's been moved to Club Fed, is her former inmates in Tallahassee. They all know that she has dirt on Trump, and not good. And for Trump. So that is a factor which I think is slowing down her potential pardon, because, like I mentioned, once you get a pardon, if you're asked to testify in court or before Congress or a grand jury about a crime or series of crimes or conspiracy, which you partook of and were pardoned for, you cannot plead the Fifth Amendment. Your Fifth Amendment right has been taken away, and you have to answer the question. If you do not answer the question or give a false statement, then you are automatically guilty of perjury due to the nature of how pardons work. That said, they're still trying to figure out what's going on. There was a White House meeting about the scandal. It was supposed to be at the Naval Observatory, but it got leaked out to the press, and it ended up being secretly held Wednesday at the White House. We do not know if Trump attended, but it was chaired by J.D. Vance, the AG Pam Bondi, the Assistant AG Todd Blanche, FBI Director Kash Patel were for sure in attendance. It's possible that Dan Bongino was in attendance, but we don't know that for sure. Also in the past week, the House Oversight Committee has finally issued the subpoenas to the FBI for the Epstein files. But they also issued subpoenas to the Clintons, the last 5 attorney generals, as well as former FBI directors Comey and Miller. Curiously, there were no subpoenas for, amongst others, the Duke of York, Prince Andrew, Alan Dershowitz, Alex Acosta, Donald Trump himself, Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, Pam Bondi, nor Todd Blanche. I do think that at this stage, the Republicans only focused on the last 5 AGs, the former FBI directors, and the Clintons, as well. They were forced to get the Epstein files from the DOJ, which they did not want to do. They focused on those folks as a still trying to own the libs situation. I do think this is going to backfire on them, and they'll be forced to issue more subpoenas on Republican folks as the files become more and more public and their investigators get a chance to look at them. But at this stage, it's just a wait and see. And speaking of files becoming public, The group Democracy Forward Foundation had filed a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act, back on July 25th. The DOJ has not yet responded. Therefore, on Friday, they had filed a lawsuit in D.C.'s federal district court. The case has already been assigned to Tanya Chutkin. For those who may not know why this is important, she was the federal district judge that was assigned to work the January 6th Trump case, which ended up being dismissed due to running out of time, because she was, as hard as she tried, with all the dragging of feet in the Supreme Court, it just never got to trial. So that is another interesting twist there. But with all that said, I hope you got a little bit more information about what's going on from this. I hope you liked it. If you do, please leave a like, subscribe, share this with anyone that you think will enjoy this. And also, please feel free to leave a comment, and please be kind to each other with those comments. And until next week, have a good day.